host this webinar series, and particularly the second one, which is focused all on business advisor skills. In this series, we're looking particularly at the range of skills and knowledge, as well as the systems that business advisors need to be able to provide high quality business advice. And we're also sharing experiences on what it takes to be a business advisor. So this is now number 6 in our current series on business advisor skills. And in today's session, it's the second of a 2-part webinar on cybersecurity. So last month we had Tim Hamer from CERT New Zealand, so that's the Computer Emergency Response Team in New Zealand. He came along and he spoke to us about common threats to watch out for. And he's also going to be joining us again today in this session, along with Siosaya Vaipuna from CERT Tonga. And so we are going to be talking about cybersecurity. This session is more about best practices that will help you to put together a cybersecurity policy for your business, and also what to do if you get a cybersecurity attack. Okay, so before we start though, I'd really like to just quickly go over the format of the webinar so that we all know how we run these things. And I'll also provide a very short update on BLP's activities. So firstly then, in terms of the format, now that we've started the more formal part, the presentation part of the webinar, can I ask you, if you haven't already, to please mute your microphones and turn your cameras off. That really helps to ensure that we've got a good connection for everyone. But please feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar by using the chat box. So that's the box that's located in the top right-hand corner, the top right-hand side in the message icon. We do welcome your thoughts and we do welcome your comments throughout the webinar through that means. So please don't hesitate. And there will also be some specific times for questions as well towards the end there. So Smitha is now recording, I believe. Yes, she's recording the webinar, so thank you for that, Smitha. And that means you'll also be able to access it afterwards if you want to recap on anything. It will be saved on the BLP website, as all our webinars are. So you can always go back and review them at any stage. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar yet with BLP, I just want to do a quick rundown on what we're all about, and also some of our recent achievements. So firstly then, Business Link Pacific is funded by the New Zealand government. It's a private sector development program and it's delivered by DT Global. So we help SMEs, small medium-sized enterprises, firstly to find suitable business advisors to help them with business issues, and then we help them with the cost of those advisory services through our subsidy scheme. Now all Business Link Pacific advisors that are approved, they go through a quality assurance process, which includes both a due diligence process and a competency assessment, and that's to verify that they have the skills and experience that they need to be able to provide high quality advice. So that way SMEs can be really confident in the services that they receive from BLP approved advisors. Now, we take this approach of working with business advisory firms to support SMEs because we know that businesses do better when they access professional advice rather than working on their own, without any professional advice. This slide shows the countries that BLP works in. And we've also recently just launched in Kiribati and Tonga. And so we're encouraging any business advisors in these countries in particular to register with us so that we can expand our footprint there. BLP's services include providing a range of online business diagnostic tools for SMEs, such as our Business Health Check and Business Continuity Planner, and our diagnostic tools. And they all help SMEs to identify areas where they may need more support. And we've got our business service managers who are located locally in each country that we work in, and their role is to support both SMEs and our advisor network with accessing BLP services. And recently we've got our new finance facility and our finance finder tool that we've launched, so that will also be able to help businesses to access capital through adaptation grants, concessionary lending, and of course subsidies for advisory services. And we've also got a range of other mechanisms and support, professional development, etc., including these webinars and our podcast series, and that's all for our advisors. And actually, as I was just saying earlier, our current podcast series is a particularly interesting one to tune into. It's on innovation, it's on recovery and strategy, and we talk to a number of stakeholders in the banking and finance sector. So do watch out for that one. Okay, so now we've got approximately, or actually just over 120 approved advisory firms, and many more advisors who are also registered on our portal. We've now got a really growing network of SMEs too, that's growing quite fast, and over 800 of which have received subsidies to access advisory services. And actually some of those subsidies have been 100% subsidies, so it's been pretty good going. Our online tools are being really well utilised, and as a result of all of our services, what we've found is that more than 400 new jobs have been created through our network, so that's really pleasing to see, and particularly pleasing because almost 40% of those jobs have been taken up by women. So yeah, really proud of those achievements so far. So that's a little bit about our progress, and a little bit about Business Link Pacific. So perhaps now then I can introduce you to today's guests. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Tim Hamer back. Tim has very kindly agreed to share again his expertise with us in this follow-up webinar. Now, Tim, of course, is a senior incident analyst at CERT New Zealand. So that's, again, the Computer Emergency Response Team in New Zealand. So he provides advice on cybersecurity, and he assists New Zealanders to recover from any cybersecurity incidents or attacks. Tim's worked across both Australia and New Zealand on incident response, and including some pretty large-scale incidents, actually. And he also provides technical development and training. So he brings a real wealth of knowledge and hands-on experience with cybersecurity. Now, we're also joined by Siosaya Vaipuna from CERT Tonga. So he's also with us today. And Saya, he's been with CERT Tonga for about the last 4 years. He heads up the day-to-day operations there, and he's got a wealth of experience in the ICT field with over 20 years of experience, mostly in the Tongan public service, but also he's worked for a telecommunications operator there as well. So we've got some real experts with us today, and thank you both for joining us, and great to have you back, Tim, and yeah, malo opito, Saya, thank you so much for coming on board today. It's great having you both here. Okay, so last time, Tim, you spoke to us about the organisations in the Pacific that businesses can get support from with cybersecurity, and you also outlined a few of the key cybersecurity threats that people need to watch out for. Now, of course, as I mentioned before, there's a recording of last month's webinar that's available for people to review, but can you perhaps just give us a very brief recap on what you covered last time, just as a bit of a reminder there?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me back. So as I discussed last time, there's a number of organizations that operate in the Pacific in the cybersecurity arena. So CERT New Zealand, we're a government body designed to take reports of cybersecurity incidents from individuals, from the public, through to small, medium-sized enterprises and large organizations, even the government. We're one of a number of CERTs in the Pacific. So as you can see, there are a couple that have been operating for a while now, and there's a few more in the process of being set up. PAXON is an organization of cybersecurity bodies within countries in the Pacific. So if you're ever in doubt where to turn for contacts, the PAXON website is a great place to go, as it'll list the contact for your specific country. There's also a number of either not-for-profits or private organizations that operate. So NetSafe is another one that operates in the cybersecurity arena, and Cybersafety Pacifica. So they both provide good public advice on cybersecurity best practices for individuals and small and medium enterprises. And as well, if you're ever at a loss for where to turn, you're more than happy to reach out to us here at CERT New Zealand, and we can either point you in the right direction or give you the appropriate advice. So the threats we covered last time, the key ones, phishing. Phishing is a kind of scam that involves soliciting information. It is usually credentials to your online accounts, but it can also include things like banking details, credit card details. So it comes in many forms. The vast majority that people receive are via email, but we've also received numerous reports of phishing through SMS text messages, through social media accounts, and through phone calls as well. So the key thing about all these is there'll usually be some sort of call to action for the recipient. These days, I think they've worked out psychologically what motivates people the most. So the types of hooks they use to lure people in are things like your account is about to expire. We've noticed a fraudulent transaction on your account. Please log in immediately so we can rectify this. So any kind of communication that prompts you to log into an account but that feels quite suspicious is a pretty good indication you're being phished. And the vast majority of it out there is simple mass spam phishing. So they'll go to as many people as they can and say, hey, you need to log into your email because your account's been compromised. But phishing can get quite targeted. So some incidents we've seen, they've gone to a lot of effort to research the person they're targeting, find out who they work with, what their role is, what kind of things they'd be expected to do in their role, and they'll use that to build a profile of who they're targeting in order to better craft a lure for them to buy into it. The primary motivation for this will be financial gain. So they're looking for some way that they can leverage compromised accounts to make money for themselves. There's a number of ways they can go about this, which leads into the next point, which is business email compromise. So business email compromise is once an account has been accessed by an attacker, they will look around for some way to get financial benefit from it. So the most common way we see is they'll try to target the people involved in accounts payable in an organization or accounts receivable, and they will use access to those accounts to craft fraudulent invoices or send invoices to the company by changing the bank details from vendors that they work with and say, please pay our standard rates for this month, but the new account that we're receiving payments to is now this one instead of the previous one. We've also seen other things where if they can't get an account within the financial center of the business, simply going to, say, the HR department and saying, hey, I've changed my personal bank account. Can you ensure that my next pay cycle goes into this account instead? And so they'll use that to gain some financial benefit from the account they hold. And then on top of that, they can simply just use the accounts to send more phishing emails. And because it's coming from a more credible source, it can be easier for them to compromise additional accounts that way. The third thing we talked about, malware and ransomware. So all malware is simply malicious software. So it installs on your computer. There's several kinds of it. The most common ones that we see are malware that tries to gain account credentials. So it'll look through your browser history. It'll look through password stores and things like that on your machine. It will look for when you access specific websites and try and hook in and scrape the traffic. So it'll try and get access to your online banking, to your email account, and use those credentials for financial gain in most cases. And then we've often seen malware like that will usually later result in a case of ransomware. So ransomware specifically is software that scrambles all your files in a way that is unrecoverable without a secret key that the organization that sent the software holds, and they will ask for a ransom in exchange for the key to unlock your files again. So ransomware is probably one of the most devastating incidents that we see. Unfortunately, if businesses either don't have appropriate backups or they have set up their backups in such a way that the ransomware also encrypted them, we've unfortunately seen businesses have to fold because they couldn't continue operations without any of their data. Common things you can do to protect yourself against these threats. So for phishing, making sure that you have good, strong passwords, making sure that the passwords across all your different accounts are unique to that account, so that if one of your account passwords is either leaked or compromised, they can't get into your other accounts using that same password, because we know that people tend to use the same password across their whole suite of online accounts. Multi-factor authentication as well. That can be as simple as receiving an SMS message that gives you a code that you enter after you enter your password. It can be an app on your phone, something like that. It's just a second layer of security on the account. So even if you lose your password without the two-factor, they're unable to get into your account. And for malware and ransomware, making sure you have a good email filtering provider so malicious attachments don't get through. Making sure you have a good up-to-date antivirus product, making sure all your software is kept up to date so that vulnerabilities can't be exploited.
That's great. Thanks, Tim, for that. That was a really great recap. And of course, as I say, if you do want to go back and see the fuller version, then do go onto the portal and you'll access the recording of that webinar. Okay, so in this session then, we're going to talk more about next the cybersecurity policy development. So, how to do that for your business. No, I'm quite sure that many SMEs might not see the need for a comprehensive suite of policies and procedures, but it is a good idea to have written down some rules and expectations on the way that you do things. So not even just in relation to cybersecurity, of course, but for all the key operational areas of your business. And that's really so that your employees know what to do. So when we talk about a policy, of course, it really is just a statement of that perhaps describes best practice. So, Saya, I'm going to ask you now, thinking about some good business practices, can perhaps you share with us what the key areas are that you'd recommend businesses think about when, when managing cybersecurity? No, I think that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for having me on the webinar.
No, great having you here.
I think a policy will define how the business intend to protect its assets and also to mitigate the risks facing the business's critical assets. If we can go on to the next slide, yeah. So all the items listed on these slides needs protecting. Adversaries or cyber criminal will and can use any of these devices to assist in achieving their goals. For instance, like the customer's private information on the client list, if the cyber criminals can have access to this and they encrypt it. In the case of a ransomware, as Tim mentioned, they can lock it up and then you cannot you cannot run your business or you cannot operate, or they can publish this on the internet where it would damage your reputation or the business's reputation. And also, like you need to protect your email systems, your transactions and financial information, because if they have access to that, they can learn about the system, learn about your partners, see how at your process and procedures, and then from there they can plan when to hit your business. I think that the main thing to bring up here is that business email compromise doesn't just happen on the day that they send the email. They would have been inside your system for quite some time, studying, getting to know your processes and your business partners who you trade with, and they would work out. Oh. Can you hear me? Oh.
You're right there, Saya. We can hear you.
Oh, I thought Tim is. It sounds like Tim is talking, no? Oh.
Tim, are you talking there, Tim? We can't hear you.
No, I'm on mute.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's something else. I can hear something in the background as well, Saya, but I don't think it's us.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So, and also the IT equipment themselves, they are up for grabs as well. For the cyber criminals, they can use this to launch other attacks against other online computers or other systems, or they can use it to mine cryptocurrency. So everything needs protection. So a way to ideally the way to develop your policy, you need to take stock of all your ICT assets, both hardware and software, and then you need to identify which assets are critical to your business. And then from there, you also need to identify or know what kind of threats that are facing your critical assets and your business. And from there, you would develop an action plan on how you would go about lessening the likelihood of those threats exploiting the vulnerabilities within your business. And then one of those within your plan, you would that's where the policy would come in,
Right.
to communicate the business's intention on how to secure or protect its critical assets.
Right.
The organization can make use of a number of different documents, not just policies. They can use guidelines, standards, and what have you. But of course, today is about policy, so we'll just focus on policy.
Okay. So yeah, I really like this slide. I think it's actually really useful because businesses often don't think about what needs protecting in their business. And certainly I've found that employees can be quite confused about who owns what information. You know, things like information are kind of, you know, they're just out there. So, you know, thinking about it from an ownership perspective, I think is really quite important. And I mean, one thing that I would certainly advise businesses is that they do have that conversation about who owns information with their employees. So that people know the sorts of things that need protecting. And I also just want to pick up on what you're talking about with regards to private information and confidential information. Because again, I like to think about these things in terms of ownership. So, you know, private information is owned by the individual who it's about, isn't it? So like I own my name, I own my address, I own my phone number, my date of birth, etc. But I might give a business permission to use my private information in certain ways. But it doesn't mean that then belongs to them. It's still my information, but I'm, if you like, giving them custody or permission, as I say, to use it in certain ways. Confidential information, on the other hand, is typically owned by a business entity, and it's their intellectual property, effectively. So, things like we've got their, client lists, they contain both private information as well as confidential information. So obviously they contain, details about the client, which is that client's private information that belongs to them. But then the list itself, so who's on that list, is confidential information. It's intellectual property of the company. So, I think it's quite important to understand that whole ownership thing, because sometimes employees or users, they think that they can take that information with them, say when they leave a company or do something with it. But it's really important to understand that. And certainly, as I say, in my experiences, often staff, they don't get, particularly relating to information that they've perhaps generated, who owns that information. So when you've created some data for a business, that data doesn't belong to you as an individual, it belongs to the business, and often that's really confused with employees. So I think that's I just wanted to pick up on that point that you're talking about, and just to say that there's often a legal requirement for companies to protect private information. And certainly in New Zealand we've got privacy acts. But I think across the Pacific, often privacy legislation is perhaps not as explicit as it is in New Zealand. It might be woven into other pieces of legislation, or perhaps even completely silent on it. So it's then down to each company to manage private information prudently. So thank you for sharing that information. I just sort of wanted to add to that, because I think that's often really misunderstood, don't you think?
Yeah, certainly. In some, I think in the more developed countries, they have privacy legislation that would fine the business if they mishandle or not protect the information of individuals.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so that's great to identify what to protect. So what about like types? So you spoke about developing policy and how to develop policy. Perhaps you can talk to the types of policies that businesses might need.
Okay, so there's three different types of policy, program policy. So this is a high level policy which sets the overall tone of a business's security approach, guiding providers of this policy to enact the other types of policies, and who is responsible for certain activities. So, and the program policy directly supports the business's mission and objectives, and also includes the scope and the purpose, roles and responsibilities. With issue specific policy, this would address specific needs within the organization, example, password, procedures, internet usage, guideline, etc. And then the system specific policy, there will be several systems that perform various functions, where the use of one policy governing all of them might not be appropriate. So, for example, a specific policy for the accounting system.
Right. No, thank you for that. And then of course, how you handle information is absolutely critical as well. So perhaps you can share some ways that you'd recommend businesses handle private, confidential information.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Again, with regards to handling information, you need to identify the data that you have and which one are critical to your business and customers. How much data do you collect? You only need to collect the relevant information, not collect too much. And then also you need to mention here where you need to store those information, how to protect them, when they're stored, how to protect them when in transit, for example, encryption, and yeah, using encryption when transmitting or communicating data between partners or to the customers. And also you may want to discuss how often you need to back up these data. As mentioned before, the ransomware attack, if your data is encrypted, you pretty much cannot operate. And I think also may need to mention here the need to have an offline backup. I think there's been cases where the cyber criminal also find their way. They didn't just encrypt the data that was in operation, in production. They also found their way to the backup and encrypted those as well. So it would be good to have an offline and also offsite backup.
Mm. So, yeah, so when you talk about collecting information, so one of the key things when we talk about private information is you've got to make sure that you're getting it from the person who owns it. So, like even in person, sometimes you might have an agent that might want to give information about my private information, but online, that's really tricky. How do you know that you're getting the information from the person that owns it? That's yeah, that's quite a challenge, I would have thought.
Yeah, yeah, that would be challenging. Of course, you'd have to verify using passport and whatnot to make sure that they are the owners of that information.
Right. Yeah. So that typically would be a good way, that you need to have some authentication of who that person is in order to collect their information first. And I suppose that's also the same when it comes to amending information. You need to make sure that it's the person who owns the information that's amending it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so ways to verify identity online. I suppose is that where your two-factor or multi-factor authentication comes in, so that you absolutely know that that's that person?
Yeah, two-factor authentication can help when people would try to log into systems and to verify that they are in fact who they claim to be.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's not just the password, they're also using their phone.
Right. So I suppose so. Like yesterday, I changed one of my passwords on one of my accounts. It was with Spark actually, and I noticed that I got an email telling me that I changed my password, and so that's really to verify that I am the person who changed that, isn't it? It's a bit of a backup to make sure that I am the right person to do that sort of activity on the account. And if I'm not, then obviously I would have got that email to let me know that somebody's changed my password. Those are some of the things that you've got to think about when you're asking to amend or want to when somebody's amending their data.
Yeah.
Okay, so and what about destroying information then? So how does that work from a cybersecurity point of view? What do you have to be mindful of?
Yeah, you just got to be mindful that, I mean, especially if you have information on hard disks on computers that you pass them along or you throw them out, that confidential and critical information to the business is not still stored on there, or they sometimes you delete information, but it's really still there. So you gotta really use the proper techniques and tools to really get rid of the information from those storage mediums.
Right. And just talking about sort of storing things, because sometimes, I mean, from my experience, I know that companies' file libraries are often in an absolute mess, and they don't really know where things get stored. So, I mean, this is absolutely critical when we're talking about private and confidential information. You know, where you store things and how you allow access to those files becomes really, you know, really quite important. And I suppose there's ways to for people to access files, or ways to secure certain files, aren't there? There's ways that you can sort of restrict them to some users and not others.
Yeah, I think those are specific to whatever application you're using. They can use access control to limit you to be able just to do enough for your job, and you're not, you know, going over what you're only supposed to do, like access or how to amend when amending information. I think that those are application specific.
Right. So I know some companies, they sort of operate, I suppose, thinking about it from two perspectives. That some companies, they think about it from, well, you know, we'll give everybody access, but then we'll just secure off some folders that only certain users can use. So that might be one approach that you might take. But then there's other companies who take, I think they call it the least privilege way of working, where, you know, you've only got access to the bare information that you need to do your job, and then we'll give you access, but that will be monitored and managed through an approval system from a manager. So there's the kind of the two different ways of looking at it, but probably the best way is the least privilege way, would you say?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the principles with access to information, is the least privilege principle, where you only access or be able to do what you need to do for your job and nothing more.
Right. Yeah. And then I suppose, you know, sometimes people can have access for a certain period of time whilst they perform a certain function, and then that access becomes gets taken away from them again.
Yeah. That's correct.
Okay. So what about security measures then? Email security measures. What sort of things do businesses need to think about there?
Again, with emails, 2FA, two-factor authentication. Some email providers they have this feature. You can turn this on, and also not using passwords that you use for your other accounts. I think Tim has touched on this last webinar, and also in his recap, so that if there is a breach of your credentials in another social media or wherever, they can't test and be successful in testing that same password within your company email. So it's good not to have the same password for your online accounts and you use them for your work.
Right. And I know some companies, you know, they may restrict their staff from downloading certain attachments, or, you know, they may prohibit certain files from being downloaded. Do you find that's quite a common thing that's stipulated in a policy, or
Yes.
is that good practice?
That is good practice. That would be in a policy, and also technically they would ensure that you aren't able to download those certain files, and also application whitelisting, where you only can use certain applications on your computer. So
right. So that's kind of like who your email provider is, whether it's Microsoft or Google or whatever. Is that what you mean?
Oh, they can. Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Oh, so I was thinking you were talking about the provider, the email, the application. So, you know, use something that's well known or trusted, or is that what you say?
Oh, I mean within your network, within your business,
Right.
Yeah, they can they can lock down your systems so that you can only use certain applications or
I see.
download certain type of files.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I know it sounds quite, sounds quite draconian sometimes for employees in particular. But again, it comes down to that often employees, they don't understand that the email account is actually owned by the business. I mean, I think often employees, they use work email accounts like for their own personal stuff. Yeah. And as soon as that happens, then the business has got no control really over cybersecurity, and that's often where those holes are in their system. So again, really important to have that understanding with employees about who owns an email account. Yeah,
and what you can use or not use them for. Like you said, some people, they sign up to social media,
right,
account and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Right. Yeah, yeah. So I know I've worked with a company who the staff, they got quite upset because they didn't realise that the email account wasn't for their total use, and the company was actually supervising emails from some staff because they were worried about what they were doing. Now that's really a perfectly legitimate thing to do, isn't it, as a business?
Yeah, I guess. But yeah, I guess as long as the staff they understand from day one that the email system belongs to the organization, and they have the right to monitor what it's being used for and stuff like that, I don't see a problem.
Okay, cool. Okay. So anything else you want to say relating to handling information on that slide?
No, I think we've pretty much covered what I wanted to discuss.
Okay, cool. I think that's really helpful advice. And yeah, as I say, from my experience, I know that employees often really misunderstand, how to manage email accounts that they've been given rather. Okay, so what about keeping your system secure then? What sort of practices do you think companies should adopt when it comes to managing their systems and processes securely?
Yeah, again, they need to identify what sort of what systems, all the systems they have, and which one are critical. And that way they can better protect them. So they also need to within the policy to discuss rules around updating and patching, fixing those vulnerabilities that the cyber criminals can exploit, and also who is responsible for doing those updating and patching, and making sure they're done regularly. Also, I think password policy that they use to access those systems, to make sure that it's not an easy password to guess, and they and again that they are not passwords that they use for other accounts online or other systems, and also what they are allowed to access, and again access and download, and also the protection of information within those systems. I'm talking about encryption and making sure that the information contained within those devices or systems are protected in the case where they're stolen, that people the criminal do not easily access them and obtain those confidential information.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Like, particularly these days when a lot of employees have got laptops, and I know one company that I've worked with. They put in their policy that employees weren't allowed to leave their laptops in the back of the vehicle, even if the vehicle was locked, because it might get stolen, and then you may lose, sensitive or valuable information. So that was written into one of their policies, I know.
Yeah.
So that's probably something to think about.
Yeah, and also might also discuss the bring your own device policy under this. So whether you allow people to bring their own computers or connect their own phones to the work Wi-Fi. Oftentimes, these are brought from home or from another network, and they've been compromised, and they come in and they use it in your workplace, and then they are able to infect other work computers and servers that are critical to your business.
Right. Yeah. And what about social media then? So, that's a huge risk, isn't it? When employees or users they want to use social media on their work laptop or work device.
Yeah, that's a risk. I mean, so the organization should think about having a policy around what people put online. Taking pictures inside the workplace. It might show something sensitive, or customer information, or information that are sensitive to the business. What Tim discussed about business email compromise, or sometimes they call CEO fraud. Like the criminals can go online and search. They know you work for a particular business, and then they go online and see what sort of activities you're doing, and then like if the CEO is traveling per se, they can spoof the CEO's email and send an email to the accounts to say, hey, I'm stuck outside my hotel. Can you please hurry up and transfer this money because my credit card is not working, or something like that. And so workers or business got to be careful on what they put online, especially on social media.
Yes, I think that's a really good point that you make about photographs as well. I know, I've done a fair bit of work in the past in the manufacturing sector, and often just the machinery, taking a photo of the machinery is their intellectual property, and they don't want you to take photos of that. So if you're an employee or you're a visitor and you want to take a photo of it, you have to be really careful and always ask permission first. So, and then thinking about security measures. So we've got firewall and antivirus software, and removing accounts when not needed up there. Can you explain a little bit about firewalls and perhaps what the difference is between a firewall and antivirus? And actually, do you need both as a business?
Yeah, you definitely need both. So a firewall is just like let's say the metal gate
Right.
that allows what to let in and what to not to let in at the border, or at your at the border, at the gate on the business. Antivirus software that would be on your servers or on your computers to protect it against malware. So these are the different types of security controls that are used to stop different types of attacks or type of threats against the business. But these are not just all there is to secure your business. There are other things, and like awareness training for the staff, updating and patching, those are important as well. But I think as we discussed before, there will be a link sent out with after the webinar that I have provided that we'll give the links will take you to like the CERT and CERT and ACSC, and also CERT Tonga. We have some advice around on how to keep businesses secure.
Yeah, certainly. We'll pop that on the last slide and send it out too. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And also you mentioned, equipment disposal. Let's not forget that when things get deleted or even your hardware, you want to dispose of them, you need to do that securely as well. So it's a really good point to just remember that it still contains sensitive information.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other comments on using systems securely then, Saya? Anything else that you think businesses need to understand with that?
No, I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to discuss.
Okay. All right, so perhaps I can hand over to our participants, because I think we've covered quite a bit of information on that, and just wondering if anyone's got any specific questions around that. And I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat room and see what questions we've got. So let's have a look. Oh, we've got a question about subsidies. I'll just skip over that one, because that one we can address later. So key threats escalating across the Pacific in recent years. So Richard's asking, Tim, have you seen key threats escalating across the Pacific, and if so, what's the number one threat that we should be aware of?
Hi. So we only specifically have visibility over New Zealand, of course, as our constituents report to us, but it's pretty much the same across the board, I imagine. So phishing is still the most commonly occurring threat that we see time and time again. It makes up the vast majority of the reports that we receive. So, I mean, it's an evergreen threat to be aware of. If I were a business, the most concerning thing to me would be ransomware, because it can be the most devastating. As I mentioned, we've seen businesses have to pack up because they could no longer continue. So just to echo what Saya said, make sure you have some good offline backups. If I can spruik one thing, having a way to recover from such an incident, and testing that they work as well. Don't just rely on a belief that they will work if you need to recover from backups. So make sure you have a practice run to prove that works. And the other thing you can do for phishing specifically would be ensuring that you have two-factor authentication on every account possible where it's available.
Great, thanks, Tim. So another question here from Jim. So for businesses and companies in a country that don't have CERTs, or the computer emergency response teams, which standards of policies would you recommend as a baseline? So Jim, I think those links that Saya referred to, that would be a really good resource for you. So we'll make sure that that you get that in a follow-up email, and also it'll be posted as well on the last slide. Richard's also asking, Saya, what are some of the most effective cybersecurity tools to use when protecting sensitive information and intellectual property? So, Saya, do you have an answer for that one?
Yeah, I don't have a specific answer, because I guess it depends on.
Yeah, it depends on the IP, I suppose, doesn't it?
Yeah, on the information and how you want to store it, and how often do you access it, and what platforms. Yeah, I cannot really. I cannot give a direct answer.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask Tim if he can assist in this regard.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all. I mean, as you said, it depends what kind of information you're trying to secure. Does it need to be publicly available? Do you have people logging in to access that information regularly versus is it just stored for your own purposes internally? We at CERT New Zealand have a resource called the Critical Controls that we publish every year. And so that is a list of the most effective controls based off of the incidents that we see. So if you ever read through that, it will provide you the best guidance. It is still going to be a very individualized decision about what specific tools or security controls that you need to implement based off of your own personal and business needs.
Great, thanks. And Clay's just popped up a link there, which will help with that. So thank you for that, Clay. Now, Jim, you've asked or you've said the importance of cybersecurity awareness for employees is a key part of your company's cyber policies. That's a really good point to make. And I think what Saya was talking about, how you've got to make sure that your employees really understand what is information that needs to be protected and how to deal with it. So yeah, training absolutely critical. Okay, great questions. Anything else anyone wants to ask? I know that we're just about up to 3 and we've not covered another key part of our webinar yet. So let's just move forward, and perhaps Tim, I can get you to talk to a key thing that I know last webinar you said it's really important. One of your top 3 pieces of advice was to have an incident plan. So can you tell us more what should be in that plan?
Absolutely. So I covered the broad points in the first webinar, but to reiterate, knowing your contact points is the most important thing you can do. So who are you going to need to contact if you have an incident affecting a specific system or a specific part of your business? So, if there's been unauthorized access to your bank account, do you know who to contact at the bank? Do you know whether they operate 24/7? So if you find out at 7 p.m. on a Saturday that something's gone wrong, is there a 24-hour fraud line at your bank that you can contact and notify them? Because time will be important when it comes to financial transactions. And the sooner you can get on top of that, the better. Again, any IT providers you use. So if there's a problem, let's say you run a website and you pay an organization to run that for you. If it gets compromised at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, do you have a way of contacting them to let them know, or do you have to wait until business hours on Monday to get in contact with them? And what would that mean for your business over that period of time? Understanding the different key types of incidents and having specific plans for each of them. So ransomware, especially, as I mentioned during the questions, having backups that are offline and unattached from your network, making sure you've tested whether you can restore files from those backups as well. Know how long it takes to restore from backups, and then understand how that would impact your business. So if it's going to take you 12 hours to restore your files from the backups that you've taken, what does that mean? Can you operate your business for 12 hours before that data is restored and ready to go? What are the important bits of data that you need to recover first? What will get you back on your feet the fastest? Things like, in the case of phishing, if you've got an account compromised, how do you remediate that? So obviously you need to change the passwords. I strongly recommend that you activate 2-factor authentication before you get an incident, but usually for a lot of people, that's the first indication that they need to activate that as a security control. So have a read through your particular providers' help pages. Look at what their process is for recovering accounts if they get compromised. So we've seen lots of instances where people take over an account and then they'll change the backup email address, they will change, they'll activate two-factor authentication themselves. And when that happens, the original owner gets locked out of the account because they can no longer just jump back in and change the password. They've now got to contend with two-factor on the attacker's device that's locking them out. And it might be quite a lengthy period of time before you can get in contact with that provider and work through their process to recover your account. So how would you operate in the meantime if that was to happen? So just making sure you're prepared with a plan of what to do. Once you're actually in the midst of an incident, the first step, and people find this quite controversial sometimes, is you want to understand the scope of the incident before you go any further. So a lot of people try to rush in as soon as possible, start trying to frantically fix things and put out the fire. But if you don't know what you're dealing with, then it can be difficult, or you can make things worse by trying to remediate the problem. So let's say you had a situation where a vendor that you work with has come to you and said, we got a suspicious email from your business telling us that we needed to change the bank account that we pay this invoice into. Is that a problem? And if you immediately assume that's because you've been compromised and you start contacting all your other vendors to say, hey, we think one of our accounts has been compromised, please ignore any correspondence about invoices from us. And then later on, you find out that it was just one of the accountants' team that sent a silly email or did something they shouldn't have. That can obviously have far-reaching consequences. You've made yourself look quite foolish to all the vendors that you work with, and it was a simple business error rather than any sign of compromise. So understand the situation as much as possible before you progress. Once you can kind of understand where you're at, what you're dealing with, then you move into the next phase, which is taking actions to remediate it. So again, rely on the plans that you've built up for this specific situation. You might not have an exact plan for every individual scenario you might face, but have some broad ideas about what you need to do and refer to them when you're in the midst of an incident. Because sometimes just taking a step back, not letting the pressure get to you and having some form of step-by-step guide to fall back on can help give you clarity that you need to remediate properly. Next up, once you've remediated the problem, you've contained the damage to what's already happened, you need to start notifying affected parties. So if an employee's had their account compromised, you've now changed their password, you need to get in touch with them, tell them, okay, we've changed your password, you'll need to change it to something else. Obviously, your account's been compromised, so either your password has leaked somewhere else and maybe you share the same password with another account that you run. Maybe you've responded to a phishing email and given your account credentials up. So you need to work with them to find out exactly what happened. If any third parties have been affected, you need to start notifying them. So if you've lost any data, we recommend that you take a moment to craft some communications, let people know what's happened, what that means for them, what you're doing to remediate it. If any vendors have been affected, like in the case of a business email compromise, you need to start notifying them. Maybe you can stop some fraudulent payments from being made. Once that's done, you move into your final phase, which is understand what went wrong at the beginning and understand what steps you can take to prevent that from going wrong. So was the problem that your accounts didn't have two-factor authentication? Do you now need to go back and ensure that all of your employees have two-factor set up for all their accounts? Was password reuse a problem? Do you need to make sure that everyone has a unique password, that employees get correct training to understand what the responsibilities are in terms of password management? Do you need to set a more stringent password policy on your machines so that only passwords of say 12 characters or more are accepted? Did you not patch a system and that's how the intrusion happened? Do you need to ensure that you have a shorter patching window, so you enforce that systems are patched within a week, within a couple of days, same day for a particularly critical vulnerability? And then go back and have a look at the plans that you created at the start. Say, okay, when we were responding to this incident, did we fall back on the plan? Did the plan contain everything that we needed to remediate it? If it didn't, use that as an opportunity to flesh out the plan a bit more. Were you missing a set of contacts that you needed to reach out to as part of that response? Were certain contacts unavailable at the time you needed them to be? And is there any way to compensate for that? Is there any way that you can work with them to establish a 24-hour contact window? Is there an emergency contact line you can establish with them? So this the diagram is very linear, but it's important to think about it as kind of a feedback loop. You want to take any insights from things that went right, things that went wrong, and feed those back into the start to say, okay, well, this is what went right, so we're happy with these portions of the plan. This is where it lacked and where we kind of stumbled around in the dark for a bit. What can we do to make sure that doesn't happen in the future?
I think that's a really good point. When every time it's continuous improvement, isn't it? Keep improving what you do and beefing up your plan for next time. I also just want to pick up on what you were saying about the notification point. That communication. You said you need to craft that communication, and you do, don't you? You need to craft it really carefully because you don't want to alarm people to something, and then they go and do something that you really don't want them to do. And you might want to think about, a priority list of who you might notify first. So I suppose typically you might start with internal people, so start inside and then go outside. But for organisations like, Business Inc. Pacific, perhaps we might want to notify up front our funder, a key stakeholder in what's going on there. So that communication piece is absolutely critical. So what sort of key information do you think they need to talk about? I mean, I suppose it's things like, what happened, when it happened, and what are the other sorts of things that typically need to be communicated? Can you outline some of those?
Yeah, so I mean, as you said, what happened, when it happened, if you've lost any information that you hold on individuals, what that information was, what the incident means, and any list of actions that you need individuals to take. So as you said, you don't want to alarm people and have them rush off or not understand what this is going to mean for them. So if things have gone wrong, making sure you can tell people what actions they can do to help protect themselves. So, if you held private information on them, if you held, say, driver's licenses, passport information, you can put them in touch or tell them to get in touch with the relevant agencies. That way, the documents can be reissued if necessary. If passwords have been leaked, making sure that you tell them they need to change their password and change it to something completely different. And if they reuse that password across any other accounts, just giving them the heads up that they should also change it across the board. And then it's important to add what you're doing as an organization to fix it as well. So give people reassurance that you're responding to this incident appropriately and you've learnt from what has happened and you're making sure that it doesn't happen again.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. Okay, so any further questions anyone wants to raise, particularly on incident planning? I just want to give our participants an opportunity to ask any further questions. So you can pop that in the chat box, or if you prefer, actually, you can just raise the hand button and turn on your microphone. But I just want to give you a final opportunity if there are any further questions. Okie dokie. So, all right, doesn't look like we've got any further questions. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. Let me just double check, run through. All right, I think we've covered off all of those. Okay, thank you. Well, look, if there are no further questions at this point in time, Saya and Tim, do you have any final comments that you'd like to add?
Know who to contact and turn on two-factor authentication. Two of the most important things you can do for yourself. If you're going to do something simple, turn on two-factor authentication. It takes a minute, and it will prevent the vast majority of account compromises.
Good advice. Thank you. Saya, anything else you want to add there?
No, thank you, Barbara. I think Tim has covered it well.
Well, I think you've both provided a great deal of information today. Thank you both very much. Certainly these two webinars have been very informative. And I think they've really helped to demystify what cybersecurity means and what it's all about. We've certainly covered a lot of information, and you've both provided really great practical advice on how to keep a business secure, and actually not just across cyberspace, but also in the physical world as well. Thanks everyone for joining us in this webinar, and particularly thank you, Saya and Tim, for being our guests in this webinar. Now, of course, we've got another webinar coming up in another month's time, so I think that's going to be on the 10th, Thursday the 10th of June. It'll be the same time, so that's 2 p.m. New Zealand time, and we'll have another important topic for business advisors. Now, as I said earlier, this series is about supporting business advisors to develop the skills they need to provide high quality services. So we want to invite you to tell us what topics you'd like us to cover. We've had some great ideas already come in, and that's great, but please do keep them coming in. Now, Smitha is now posting the link in the chat box to a little survey that we'd like you to go through, if that's all right, and we'll be asking for your feedback, some of those ideas that you want for webinars, but also a little bit of feedback on today's webinar. If you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to complete it, we'd really appreciate that. And then, of course, keep your eyes out for next month's webinar invitation. Okay, so that now concludes our webinar for today. Thank you again, Tim and Saya. Malo pito, whawhatai lava. Thank you, Tomas. Vinakamayata. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing you all again next month. Mā te wā.